When you sign, you prepare for enemies. You prepare for chaos. You prepare for but nothing prepares you for betrayal. From home, from the one person who promised to wait, to stand by you, to love you through it all. My name's Marcus. I'm 36, a staff sergeant in the U.S. Army. 2-day P, and the coldest, most gut-wrenching email of my life didn't come from, it came from my wife. I need space. I've moved on. I've taken what's mine. Don't contact me. Attached was a screenshot. Our joint bank account, the one I'd been funneling every spare balance, $0. Every single cent gone. I stared at that screen frozen. At first I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe a scam. Maybe her account was hacked. But then I logged into our banking app through the military VPN. Nope. It was real. $74,000. All transferred. All traceable. All to her. I was sitting in a command tent halfway across the world, and back home, the woman I thought would always be there for. But here's the part that still cuts the deepest. It wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about the trust. I trusted her with my name, my home, my future, and she left me with an empty account and a ghost of the life I thought we had. We had just celebrated our 8-year anniversary. She sent me a care package, handwritten letters, some photos, a little dog tag pendant with the word always engraved on it. I wore it every day. Turns out, always meant until the money clears, because behind that handwritten note, she was already withdrawing, quietly, strategically, moving money into a separate account, scrubbing her name from documents, planning an escape while I was sleeping in barracks, dodging mortar rounds and praying my team made it home safe. She thought I wouldn't notice. She thought I couldn't fight back. But what she didn't know is that I don't just fight battles out there. I plan for them, because I'm not just a soldier. I'm a logistics officer. I think 5 steps ahead of failure, and that includes when failure comes from someone you love. So when her message came in like a slap across the face, I didn't lose it. I went quiet. And I started checking the systems. Accounts she didn't know about. Assets she couldn't touch. Documents I'd secured years ago when I started noticing cracks, not just in her story, but in how she looked at me. And that's when I smiled. Because yes, she emptied the account, but she forgot what I still controlled. And that made all the difference. I'm not coming back. That was the first line. Followed by, I've met someone better. I've already moved your stuff to storage. The message came in at 11:42 p.m. while I was sitting at our kitchen counter in Jacksonville, sipping the last of my lukewarm coffee. My name is Cole Matthews. I'm 37, a logistics specialist in the U.S. Navy, and until last night, I thought I was a happily married man. My wife Taylor was supposed to be on day 4 of a girls' trip to Scottsdale, Arizona. Turns out it was a one-way ticket out of our marriage. Attached to the message was a screenshot of a bank transfer $200 withdrawn from our joint account, dumped straight into hers. Just like that, 15 years, gone. No call, no warning, just cold digits and a breakup text. I didn't throw the cup, I didn't scream, I just stared. Then I did what I've been trained to do in combat zones, assess the damage, then plan the response. You see, Taylor never cared much for what I did. She said she respected the military but hated being a military wife. The deployments, the missed holidays, the unpredictability. But she sure liked the TRICARE health plan and the steady paychecks, especially the bonuses that came with my overseas tours. Funny thing, I saw this coming months ago. Taylor started taking more solo trips. New clothes I'd never seen her wear around me. Whispers on the phone that stopped when I walked in. And lately, she hadn't even pretended to care. She thought I was distracted. And to be fair, I was prepping for deployment managing logistics for 2 naval units juggling 12-hour shifts. But I wasn't blind. She thought I'd never notice. But here's the twist: while she was planning her exit, I had already laid down mine. Not from the marriage, from the assumptions she made about what I owned, and what she thought she could steal. I pulled up my laptop. Not the family one, my secure work-issued device. The one she never knew existed. I logged into a private dashboard, one I'd built over years, integrating everything finances, legal safeguards, account tracking alerts. A system designed to kick in if the worst ever happened. Tonight, it happened. She'd moved fast, cleaned out our joint account. But she'd overlooked something major. The house in my name. paid off with my pre-marriage savings and veteran housing benefits. She never thought to ask how it was titled. The cars both leased under my LLC. She drove them, but she didn't own a thing. The investment account she thought was ours. It was split. Her name was only on the one I used for tax smoothing. The real portfolio, the one with 6 figures in defense stocks and dividends, hidden under a military trust structure, one she never bothered to ask about. Because every time I tried to talk money, she said, "You handle that. It's boring." Guess who's not bored now? I checked the triggers I'd coded. Auto freeze protocols kicked in. The moment a withdrawal over $25,000 hit our joint account. All shared credit lines locked down. Access revoked. Transaction logs saved. At 11:58 p.m., I texted one person, "It's happening." Mike, my best friend since boot camp, now a JAG officer stationed in Norfolk, replied instantly. "Move to phase 2, affirmative." He sent over the paperwork. Divorce prep, fraud documentation, emergency court order templates. By 12:30 a.m., I had filed a digital affidavit with the local courthouse. Taylor had no clue. She thought she'd made the first move, but she was already in checkmate. The next morning, I got up at 5 a.m. sharp. Old habits, deployment mode. I brewed coffee, sat on the porch, watched the sun break over the horizon, the Florida sky bleeding into orange. Taylor still hadn't replied to the text I sent before bed. Just 2 words, "Good luck." At 7:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. Not a call. A bank notification, another attempt to access our joint savings. Denied. Then another. And another. 17 attempts before 9 a.m. I chuckled. She was panicking. She'd assumed that because I was thousands of miles away on a forward deployed ship, I'd be helpless. She thought the military paycheck she drained was the only thing I had going. She didn't know I'd been funneling bonuses into a federal credit union account she didn't even know existed, one linked to a living trust created during my first tour. She didn't know I'd spoken with a military family law attorney last year when things started to sour. She didn't know that under Florida's equitable distribution laws, fraud and asset concealment during a divorce, that changes the game entirely. She also didn't know that I'd kept every receipt, every Venmo transfer she made to some yoga instructor, every unexplained Uber ride at 1:00 a.m., every charge at hotels I'd never heard of. By noon, my lawyer had filed for emergency spousal support suspension and a freeze on all community property. At 2:46 p.m., Taylor finally called. I didn't pick up. She texted instead, "Why can't I access the accounts? What did you do? I let it sit." 5 minutes later, she called again, then again, and again. By 4:00 p.m., she'd sent 7 texts, called 5 times, and even emailed me. The subject line, "Let's talk." I think there's been a misunderstanding. There it was. The shift from smug to scared. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded all communication to my attorney along with a digital copy of our prenuptial agreement. That's right. We had one, buried in a folder she hadn't seen in 10 years. She'd forgotten it existed. She'd also forgotten the clause about marital misconduct, and the one about asset tampering, and the one about how any attempt to hide, withdraw, or relocate funds without consent voided her share of the military pension. You see, Taylor planned an exit, but I planned for survival. And I wasn't even done yet. I wasn't about to lose everything because someone else decided my loyalty made me disposable. When you're thousands of miles away wearing a uniform and dodging sandstorms, you think about what really matters. And as I stood outside the base that night, phone in hand, $132,000, gone from our account marriage up in smoke, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity. Not rage, not panic, just certainty. She'd played her hand. Now it was my turn. The very next morning, I called the one person who knew everything, my cousin Brian. Not just family. He was a cybersecurity expert who used to work for a private military contractor. I trusted him more than anyone. "Remember that protocol we set up back in 21, I asked. He laughed. "Yeah, you told me it was overkill. Guess I was wrong." He was already in front of his laptop. "All right, let's get to work." Within 2 hours, he'd confirmed what I suspected. She'd routed the funds to a new account under her name, but linked it to a business LLC I'd never heard of. That LLC? It was tied to a fitness influencer in Arizona, some guy named Cade Rivers. The worst part, she'd opened a joint line of credit under both our names for a startup retreat center they were planning. She thought I was busy dodging bullets. She didn't know I'd been quietly preparing for war. Here's something she never knew: I never merged all my assets. Yes, we had a joint account, but my real savings, my inheritance from Grandpa Joe, my military bonuses, crypto gains, and the equity from my side hustle software company, all tucked away under legal trusts and LLCs she couldn't touch. You see, I believed in our marriage, but I also believed in contingency plans. So while she thought she had drained me dry, all she had touched was the surface. That weekend, Brian and I compiled a full report: the fraudulent withdrawals, evidence of her co-signing unauthorized business loans, her affair documented by Instagram geotags and overlapping receipts, and the biggest bombshell: she'd used my deployment status to falsely claim power of attorney on one of the banks. Monday morning, my attorney filed for an emergency asset freeze. By Wednesday, the judge granted it. Everything she'd touched, frozen. Her new credit cards declined. Retreat center in default. The best part, I didn't say a single word to her. That Friday, I got a message: "Evan, we need to talk." No apology, no explanation, just that. I didn't reply. Instead, I sent a one-sentence email to her lawyer: "All communications go through legal." Back on base, I focused on the mission, but I wasn't numb. I was methodical. Every night I logged in and documented everything: every asset, every screenshot, every trace of her betrayal. And when I finally returned stateside, not to her arms, but to an empty driveway in a foreclosed retreat center, I didn't feel broken. I felt ready. We met once in a cold mediation room, her makeup cracked at the edges. I didn't know what I was doing. She said, eyes wet. "No," I replied. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You just didn't think I'd fight back." My lawyer laid out the evidence. Her lawyer went pale. In the end, I kept everything I'd worked for. She walked away with debt. She had tried to rewrite the ending of our story, but I wasn't stupid. I was silent. I was calm. I was prepared. And that made all the difference. I didn't sleep much that night. Boy, the ache wasn't from betrayal anymore. It was the anticipation. The moment you know your plan's finally in motion. That cold, measured clarity that comes not from anger, but from preparation. I poured myself a cup of coffee, same as always. Funny how routines survive even in the middle of chaos. And as the sun broke through the windows, I sat down in front of my laptop, logged into my encrypted server, and began. The first thing I did was contact the JAG officer, Judge Advocate General. For civilians who don't know, JAG is like the military's internal legal system, and I knew exactly how military policy worked when it came to joint finances, legal documentation, and spousal conduct while deployed. I wasn't just going to file for divorce. I was going to do it under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which had very different consequences than she imagined. Because see, when you're deployed and your spouse knowingly empties your account without consent, that falls under financial misconduct. And depending on the circumstances, it can even be considered theft, especially if it impacts your ability to function while on duty. I wasn't planning revenge. I was building a wall of legal facts so high and so solid that there would be no escape hatch. The next step was freezing joint accounts. Dana had already taken $92,400 from our primary savings. What she didn't know was that a year earlier, I'd created an entirely separate contingency trust. It wasn't illegal. In fact, it was encouraged for high-risk deployments. It was part of a pre-deployment plan with a financial advisor I'd quietly hired. Inside that trust, $126,000 in diversified funds, none of which she could touch. She thought she'd clean me out. In reality, she got a third of what I had set aside. And now I had leverage. 2 days later, my lawyer stateside served her with formal notice of divorce proceedings. We filed on grounds of fraud and financial abuse under both civilian law and military jurisdiction. And here's where things get interesting. She never saw it coming, because Dana assumed the military worked like her yoga studio, loose, flexible, and passive. It doesn't. The response time was immediate. Her assets were flagged for review. The condo, in my name. The car leased under a military benefit program. The business half of it was funded with my paychecks, and I had every receipt. And then came the part she really didn't expect. I filed for emergency relief under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. This act protects deployed service members from being exploited back home. In practical terms, it meant she couldn't sell, move, or touch any of our shared property without going through military legal first. Her world of silent yoga retreats and smoothie bowl Instagram reels just crashed into federal litigation. I could have stopped there, but I didn't. Because a week after being served, Dana tried to play the sympathy card. She posted on Facebook about being abandoned while her husband was overseas about having to rebuild her life. You know, standard influencer victim narrative, but she made a mistake. She mentioned the divorce publicly, and that opened the door for me to respond with evidence. So I didn't write a bitter post. I didn't call her names. I simply attached a screenshot of the $92,400 bank withdrawal, the timestamp, and the military deployment log that proved I was on active duty in Kuwait at the time. Then I said, please respect both truth and process. That's all I ask. The post went viral within our circle. Her followers split in half. Some unfollowed immediately. Others asked questions she couldn't answer, and slowly her image of calm control started to fracture. But I wasn't done yet. Remember the condo she moved out of while I was gone? The one she assumed I wouldn't fight for. She'd tried to list it behind my back. What she didn't realize is that I'd already installed a biometric lock system and the sale couldn't go through without dual owner verification. I got an alert the moment a realtor tried to access the paperwork. And so I showed up. In uniform. On leave. She wasn't expecting me to fly home, but I did. I walked into that real estate office, calm, professional, and with all the documentation in hand. The look on her face when she walked in and saw me sitting there, that was the first real moment of realization that her control was an illusion. She whispered harshly, "You can't just show up here," I said. "Actually, I can because you tried to illegally list a jointly owned asset during my deployment. That's a federal crime." The realtor excused herself. Dana stormed out, and I just sat there sipping coffee knowing I didn't need to chase or yell because I had facts, and law, and time. The next month moved fast. Military lawyers launched their side of the investigation. Civilian legal teams began audit requests on the business accounts she tried to hide. Her influencer sponsorships started pulling out. Apparently, even kombucha brands don't like drama tied to financial fraud. And then came the cherry on top. She filed a motion to claim spousal support. My lawyer laughed because I had already filed an exhibit of financial misconduct screenshots of her transferring funds to a man named Zach, the so-called life coach she met during her healing journey. Turns out he was also married, so not only had she taken the money, she'd been investing it into another man's business while still legally married to me. I don't share all this to say I won or to get back at her. I share it because people assume military guys like me are clueless or distracted or too loyal to notice betrayal. But here's the truth. We notice. We just don't always react immediately. We wait. We plan. We endure. Because that's what the job teaches us. Patience, precision, purpose. And when we move with force. I ended up finalizing the divorce in arbitration. No trial, no drawn-out drama. She walked away with a fraction of what she expected. No alimony, no rights to my military pension, and a frozen credit score from too many failed business ventures. I moved into a smaller place. Nothing fancy, but peaceful. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. Because no matter how much she thought she took, she never got the best parts of me. Those stayed with me, always. And if you're listening to this wondering what you'd do if you were in my shoes, here's my advice. Don't panic. Prepare. Don't explode. Execute. Don't seek revenge. Secure your future. You don't need to destroy someone to win. You just need to protect what's yours and let the truth do the rest. I remember sitting in that cold conference room, the air stale with cheap carpet cleaner and corporate fear. My wife sat across from me, her lawyer fumbling through a folder of rapidly unraveling defense strategies. Her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. Shaken, stripped of the arrogance that once fueled her betrayal. "You can't really want to do this," she said. "We were married. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" I didn't answer right away, because the truth was it had meant something to me. For years, I'd been the provider, the protector, the one who made sure we had everything we needed while I was overseas. While I was risking my life, she was dismantling ours. One transaction at a time, one lie at a time. "You don't get to ask that question anymore," I finally said. "Not after what you did." The mediator cleared her throat, trying to regain control of the meeting, but the damage was done emotionally and financially. We submitted the forensic reports, bank statements, digital communications, the fake business registrations she tried to hide. Everything. Her world came apart in slow motion, and then came the real-world consequences. The legal reckoning. With the overwhelming evidence, we had unauthorized transfers, misuse of military benefit funds, and signature forgery. It didn't take long for a judge to rule in our favor. Emergency injunction. Granted, joint assets frozen done. Her access to retirement funds and pension accounts revoked immediately. But what shook her the most wasn't the financial loss. It was the silence. Her friends stopped calling. Her online coaching page lost followers by the hundreds. When you've built your life on illusions, the truth cuts deepest. My legal team pushed for what's called marital fraud restitution, and because some of the money she'd siphoned had been earmarked for military relocation, the court considered it a federal issue. She wasn't just a cheating spouse, she was potentially facing a felony. Collateral damage and clarity. I'd be lying if I said I walked away unscathed. There were nights I sat in my temporary apartment staring at empty walls and wondering how I missed the signs. Nights when guilt sank in like concrete guilt for not catching on sooner, guilt for loving someone who didn't value loyalty. But those nights got fewer. I started journaling again. Therapy helped. So did time. And, strangely so, did rebuilding. Not just financially, but personally. I moved out of the condo we'd shared and bought a modest fixer-upper on the edge of town. A quiet place with enough land to breathe, think, and grow. I turned the spare room into an office, not just for work, but for writing out my next chapter. And as for the military, I requested a stateside assignment for a while, something that let me serve without sacrificing my personal stability. I reconnected with old friends, learned how to be alone without being lonely, and eventually I stopped thinking about her every day. The unexpected letter. About 6 months after the court ruling, I got a letter, handwritten, from her. She said she didn't expect forgiveness, that she just wanted to say she was sorry not for getting caught, but for underestimating me, for thinking I was just a soldier who'd never look past duty, for believing I was too blind or too trusting to see the truth. She ended it with one line, "You deserve better, and I hope one day you find it." I didn't respond. I didn't tear it up either. I just filed it away like a closed case. The quiet victory doesn't always look like a celebration. Sometimes it looks like peace. Like walking your dog without checking your phone every 5 minutes. Like watching a football game and not thinking about court dates. Like sleeping 8 hours without waking up in a cold sweat. Sometimes victory is just the absence of noise. The lesson I learned. I'm not here to tell you that betrayal won't break you. It will. It cracked every piece of who I thought I was. But I am here to tell you something more important. You don't have to stay broken. You don't have to let betrayal define you. You don't have to stay silent or play nice or pretend that love should excuse criminal behavior. You're allowed to stand up, to fight back, to protect what's yours, not out of revenge, but out of principle. Preparation isn't paranoia, it's protection. And trust, it's not given blindly. It's earned, repeatedly, faithfully. If you're in a relationship where you feel like something's off, it probably is. Don't wait until the worst happens to prepare. Final thoughts. Voiceover call to action. If you've ever been betrayed by a partner, a friend, a boss, you know the sting. But I promise you this, the story doesn't end at betrayal. You still hold the pen. You can write your way through the rubble and build something stronger, smarter, more yours. So don't just survive it. Outsmart it. Outgrow it. Outlive it. And when they realize you weren't the fool they thought, they'll remember what you still controlled. If you've made it this far, you already know this wasn't just a story about betrayal. It was a story about waking up. When my wife drained our account while I was deployed overseas, she thought she was leaving behind a man who was too blind to notice and too soft to fight back. What she didn't realize was that I had already been preparing not out of paranoia, but from a quiet instinct that something wasn't right. Now looking back, here's what I want to share. Not as a victim, not as a bitter man, but as someone who's been through it and came out standing taller. 1. Always protect your foundation. Love doesn't mean you turn off your brain. Being in a relationship doesn't mean surrendering your common sense. You can love someone with your whole heart and still keep your eyes open. You should. I'm not telling you to be suspicious of every smile or every compliment, but have your systems in place legally, financially, emotionally. Because when the storm comes, and believe me, sometimes it does, you'll want your feet planted on solid ground. 2. Document everything, quietly. People show you who they are in little ways before they ever scream it in big ones. When she started acting differently, Canceling calls, making excuses, spending without explanation. I didn't confront her. I documented. I paid attention, not for revenge, for protection. When someone tries to rewrite the story later, having the receipts will matter more than you think. And when it comes to court spanks or the law, proof always speaks louder than tears. 3. Never underestimate your quiet power. When you're calm in chaos, when you act with precision while others panic, you are the most dangerous person in the room. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't chase. I didn't beg. I executed a plan I had quietly put in place over the years, not because I expected betrayal, but because I valued peace of mind. The moment she thought she had all the control was the same moment she lost it. Why? Because the power she thought she had was only ever borrowed. 4. People will show you who they are, believe them. She took the money. She moved out. She lied and spun stories to mutual friends. But even then, part of me wanted to believe it was a mistake, that maybe she'd come to her senses, that maybe love could still be salvaged. It couldn't, and I had to accept that. Sometimes the person you fell in love with exists only in memory. The version standing in front of you now may be someone completely different. Learn to see clearly. 5. Healing isn't about forgetting. It's about owning your story. People say, just move on. But healing doesn't mean pretending it didn't hurt. Healing means facing the pain, processing it, and then choosing not to carry. It took time. Some nights were quiet and hollow. Others were filled with anger and what-ifs. But day by day, I started to build something again. Not a 6. Money comes and goes. Your character stays. She ran off with thousands of dollars. She co-signed loans with another man using my name. And sure, that hit hard. But what mattered more in the end wasn't the loss. It was how I responded to it. I didn't destroy her. I didn't drag her through the mud. I let the truth speak for itself. And because I acted with integrity, I walked away with something far more valuable than cash self-respect. 7. Closure is something you give yourself. Don't wait for an apology. Don't expect an explanation. Sometimes the only closure you get is the decision to close the door yourself. And that's enough. When I sat on my new porch in a different home watching the sun rise with a quiet cup of coffee, I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. And freedom after betrayal is the sweetest peace you'll ever taste. So if you're listening to this and going through something similar, whether it's betrayal, heartbreak, or loss, just know this. You're not weak for hurting. You're not stupid for loving. But you are powerful for surviving. And one day, not too far from now, you'll wake up with that same quiet clarity. You'll breathe easier, you'll feel lighter, and you'll finally say to yourself with absolute certainty, I didn't deserve what happened, but I absolutely deserve what comes next. Stay strong, stay smart, and never forget your worth.